What if the past is quieter than we expect, not because nothing happened, but because time has learned how to whisper? Every generation believes it stands at the edge of knowledge, peering backward with clearer eyes than those before. We excavate, catalog, date, and label, convinced that each layer of soil brings us closer to certainty. And yet, history is not a straight road. It is a shoreline, reshaped by every tide. What survives is not always what mattered most, but what endured weather, politics, neglect, and chance. This story begins not with answers, but with a feeling shared by archaeologists, historians, and ordinary listeners alike. The sense that something human has been misplaced, not stolen, not hidden by villains, but quietly set aside by time, misunderstanding, or caution. Across deserts, jungles, and buried cities, researchers have encountered anomalies, objects, measurements, or patterns that do not sit comfortably within the timelines we carry in our minds. Often these moments arrive softly. A radar echo where stone should be solid, a skeleton too old for its shape, a tool too precise for its supposed age. Most of these moments never become headlines. They dissolve into footnotes, debates, or unanswered questions. Sometimes they are shelved for later study. Sometimes they are reinterpreted until they fit more familiar stories. This is not necessarily malice. Human knowledge advances by consensus, and consensus is slow to change. Extraordinary claims demand patience, restraint, and humility. Yet humility cuts both ways. The deeper we look into the past, the more we are reminded that civilization is fragile. Libraries burn, cities flood, languages vanish. Knowledge can be lost not only through catastrophe, but through disinterest. A technique no longer needed is forgotten. A symbol no longer understood becomes decoration. Over centuries, meaning thins out, leaving behind artifacts that feel like riddles without keys. In this series, we will move through 10 such riddles, not as proofs of secret histories or forbidden truths, but as mirrors reflecting our relationship with certainty. Each chapter explores a discovery that unsettled expectations. Machines that seemed too complex, maps that appeared too precise, societies that defied assumptions about progress or capability. In every case, the evidence sparked debate rather than resolution. The tension lies not in what is true or false, but in how we respond when knowledge resists easy classification. We will meet researchers who followed data where it led, sometimes to professional isolation, sometimes to quiet revision. We will visit landscapes altered by both nature and policy, where access itself becomes part of the story. And we will ask a difficult question, again and again. When faced with ambiguity, do we listen or do we simplify? This is not a journey into conspiracy, but into uncertainty. A space where science and imagination briefly overlap, where the line between error and insight is thin, and where human curiosity persists even without closure. The past, after all, does not owe us comfort. It owes us only traces. Perhaps the most important lesson is not about lost technology or forgotten civilizations, but about us. About our desire for clean narratives, our discomfort with gaps, and our tendency to mistake silence for absence. History is written not only by those who prevailed, but by those whose records survived. As we begin, consider this. If a discovery does not fit the story we tell about ourselves, is it wrong, or is the story unfinished? It started with a hum beneath the sand, an echo the ground could feel, but the air could not carry. In 1993, beneath the sun-scorched gaze of the Great Sphinx of Giza, a Japanese research team led by Dr. Sakuji Yoshimura conducted a routine ground-penetrating radar survey. What they expected were layers of sediment, perhaps remnants of foundations or hidden chambers. What they found was something else entirely, a massive metallic structure buried beneath the monument's ancient pause. It was unlike anything known to exist in the archaeological record. 30 meters long, composed of an alloy no human civilization had ever worked with, and, most unsettling of all, still active. The radar scans revealed internal chambers, geometric precision, and mechanical architecture beyond comprehension. When electromagnetic sensors registered patterns of energy still pulsing beneath the sand, the implications were staggering. The object was not dead. It was waiting. But within days, curiosity turned to silence. Yoshimura's permits were revoked. His instruments were seized. Egyptian authorities expelled him and imposed a sweeping ban on further investigation. His data, however, had already been transmitted back to Japan, where independent analysts verified what he feared. The structure bore technological hallmarks, centuries, perhaps millennia, ahead of known engineering. Its metal contained isotopes not found naturally on Earth. The machine beneath the Sphinx, a phrase as strange as it is unforgettable, seemed to echo the impossible. It defied historical boundaries, mocked linear progress, and cast a shadow over everything we thought we knew about the ancients. There was no press conference, no headlines. Instead, a series of quiet obstructions. Journals refusing to publish, funding disappearing, colleagues withdrawing under vague institutional pressure. Eventually, even whispers dried up. But the energy readings persisted. Radar scans conducted years later confirmed the structure's continued presence and activity. Concrete barriers now guard the area. The official explanation remains one of conservation. The truth is less clear. This event is not just about what was found. It is about what followed, the impulse not to investigate, but to bury, to protect not the site, but the story. Why? Perhaps because to acknowledge such a find would unravel more than timelines. It would demand we reconsider the foundations of human history, the origins of technology, the very narrative of civilization's dawn. What if the ancients did not merely dream of gods and stars, but preserved something tangible, knowledge, machines, remnants of a world we no longer understand? The image is haunting. The Sphinx, symbol of mystery, quietly watching over a secret of unimaginable age and purpose. Not as a guardian of riddles, but as a monument to memory, memory repressed, redirected, rewritten. So we are left with questions more durable than stone. If this machine is real, who built it, and why? If it still functions, what is it for? And most of all, why have we chosen not to know? Perhaps the machine beneath the Sphinx is less a revelation than a reflection of how power responds to mystery, of how knowledge can be silenced not with denial, but with delay. In the end, the hum beneath the sand remains, not loud, but persistent. A call not yet answered, a story not yet told. It began in the silence of ancient rock, bones folded into the earth long before time had a name. In 1880, on the windswept plains of Argentina, geologist Dr. Carlos Ameghino made a discovery that should have changed everything. While surveying fossil beds near Monte Hermoso, he unearthed skeletal remains of what appeared to be anatomically modern humans, embedded in geological strata over 25 million years old. The implications were staggering. According to accepted science, Homo sapiens had not yet appeared on Earth. And yet, here were full skeletons, indistinguishable from people today, locked in stone from an era long before apes had even diverged from their common ancestors. The reaction from the academic world was swift, not in excitement, but in rejection. Initial publications were withdrawn, funding disappeared, colleagues distanced themselves. Official explanations cited contamination, dating errors, misidentification. But none of these held up under scrutiny. British paleontologist Arthur Smith Woodward, renowned in his field, traveled to Argentina and confirmed the findings, even uncovering tools and artifacts in the same layer, objects shaped with a level of craftsmanship that defied the era's known capabilities. Then the silence came. The fossils vanished into private collections, inaccessible to science. Museums refused to acquire them. Conferences declined to exhibit them. Behind closed doors, institutions debated not what the evidence meant, but how to ensure it never became public. Internal letters from university archives would later reveal why. The discovery threatened the foundations of evolutionary theory, the linear model of human emergence, the notion of progress from primitive to modern. If humans existed 25 million years ago, the story of our species was not a line. It was a cycle, a spiral of rise and ruin, advancement and erasure. Modern genetic tests on tissue samples from the Monte Hermoso fossils, quietly conducted decades later, confirm the truth. DNA sequences matched today's populations with 99.7% similarity. These were not early humans. They were us. Still, the textbooks made no mention. Educational materials were edited to remove reference to anomalous finds. The narrative marched on. Evolution as steady ascent, with no room for mystery. A story curated not by evidence, but by consensus. What becomes of a discovery no one wants? It gathers dust. It becomes legend, or it becomes warning. The bones in the Argentine stone suggest that humanity has lived before and fallen before, that civilizations may have risen in epochs now lost beneath oceans, forests, and sands, that the past is not a place behind us, but a landscape riddled with forgotten paths. And so we are left with a possibility both humbling and profound, that we are not the first, that our greatness is not unique, that what we call history is only the part that survived. What else, buried deep beneath layers of time, still waits to remind us who we have been? In the end, the fossils tell us less about ancient humans than about ourselves. Our fear of rewriting what we think we know, our resistance to ambiguity, and our tendency to protect belief, even at the expense of truth. It began with a shimmer under sunlight, a skull that caught the light too perfectly to be stone. Between 1924 and 1927, British explorer Frederick Mitchell Hedges claimed to have uncovered one of the most enigmatic collections of artifacts ever found, 13 crystal skulls scattered across the ruins of ancient Maya and Aztec civilizations. Not crude carvings or replicas, but impossibly intricate human skulls carved from single blocks of quartz crystal, each flawless, each impossible. They weren't just decorative. The skulls defied explanation. Crafted without visible tool marks, shaped against the grain of the crystal without shattering it, they exhibited internal lenses and prisms, intricate optical systems that could focus and refract light. Engineers at Hewlett-Packard, who examined one skull in 1970, declared it a technological enigma, unmakeable even with the most advanced instruments of the time. But the mystery deepened further. Under specific lighting, the skulls emitted something like holograms, projections of star charts, mathematical equations, and images encoded into the crystal itself. Some showed patterns consistent with binary data transmission. Others hummed with electrical energy when exposed to heat or pressure, as if they were storing or responding to information. Dr. Anna Mitchell Hedges, Frederick's daughter and one of the few eyewitnesses to the initial finds, believed the skulls were more than relics. She described them as parts of a larger system, designed not merely for ritual, but for communication, perhaps even computation. Some researchers speculated the skulls could function as data storage, transmitting information when arranged in a particular formation. Others saw in them an echo of something older, a forgotten language of light and vibration. But access to the skulls disappeared quickly. Those held by museums were removed from display. Independent researchers were denied access. Government officials cited national security concerns. Some skulls were transferred to unknown storage facilities. Others vanished altogether. Internal memos from the Smithsonian leaked decades later revealed unease, not over the authenticity of the skulls, but over their implications. If real, they challenged not only archaeology, but our assumptions about ancient cognition, suggesting a level of technological sophistication that belonged not to ancient Mesoamerica, but to a future yet unrealized. Were these skulls remnants of an unknown civilization, or transmissions from somewhere else entirely? Were they symbols or tools, warnings or keys? In the absence of answers, stories rushed in to fill the vacuum. Legends spoke of 13 skulls scattered to prevent misuse, capable, when reunited, of revealing forgotten truths. But beyond the myth lay something quieter, more unnerving, the possibility that knowledge is not always linear, that intelligence is not always human, that memory can be encoded not just in words, but in form, material, and frequency. What if the crystal skulls were never meant to be found, one at a time? What if their silence is not failure, but design? In the shimmering curves of carved quartz, we glimpse a kind of ghost, of knowledge that didn't belong to us, or that we are not yet ready to claim. The skulls remind us that understanding is not just about discovery, but about preparation. Perhaps their silence waits for a question we've not yet learned to ask. Or perhaps they've been speaking all along, and we've simply forgotten how to listen. The story begins in dust and fire, beneath the cracked soil of ancient Baghdad, where silence hid a forgotten spark. In 1936, German archaeologist Wilhelm König uncovered a strange collection of objects near the ruins of an ancient Parthian settlement. Among them were clay jars with copper cylinders and iron rods, what would later be known as the Baghdad batteries. Primitive, yes, but capable of generating a weak electrical current. They were a curiosity, a footnote in the annals of forgotten technologies, but Koenig's work didn't end there. Digging deeper, beneath layers untouched for 2,000 years, he found something extraordinary, remnants of a vast electrical infrastructure. Copper wiring laid with geometric precision, ceramic insulators carefully spaced, junction boxes built with alloys unknown to modern metallurgy. This wasn't symbolic or accidental. It was a grid, a city wired for power. The deeper Koenig explored, the more questions emerged. The wiring showed signs of long-term use. Oxidation patterns where current had clearly flowed. Switches remained intact, fashioned from metal that resisted corrosion. Their design reflected knowledge of electromagnetic fields, of alternating current, of circuit isolation, principles not formally understood until centuries later. But the most astonishing detail was not what Koenig found, but what followed. His photographs were seized. The dig site was shut down, official reports redacted. Iraqi authorities revoked his excavation permits. And with sudden finality, the site was sealed, first with bureaucracy, then with concrete. What could not be buried so easily were the fragments Koenig had already shared. British engineer R.A. Ford examined samples and confirmed their authenticity. The layout, materials, and design all pointed to a fully functional power distribution system. Not symbolic, not ritual, practical. But without the full site, without permission to study it, the mystery hardened into myth. No known power source has been recovered, no dynamos, no generators. Yet magnetic anomalies recorded beneath the old city suggest the presence of something massive still hidden underground. Something that once hummed with energy and now lies dormant beneath layers of policy and time. What kind of civilization could have built such a thing only to disappear? And why was it erased from history so completely? Museum records once listed hundreds of related artifacts, switches, cables, engineered ceramics, but these items have since vanished from catalogs, lost in transfers, misfiled, or forgotten. When questioned, officials respond with silence, or denial, or redacted paperwork. The Baghdad grid, if real, would rewrite the story of electricity. It would force us to abandon the comfortable idea that knowledge moves only forward, that we are the culmination of progress. It would mean that somewhere in our past, someone else cracked the code, then fell into silence. Koenig never got another chance. His discovery was locked away. Not disproved, just disappeared. Not refuted, but deferred. And so the forgotten spark beneath Baghdad remains just that, a flicker, a whisper of what might have been. A reminder that sometimes the past does not slumber. It waits. If energy once flowed through that ancient earth, lighting homes, powering tools, shaping a world we no longer recognize, what was lost when it dimmed? And more haunting still, could it happen again? It began in the quiet grasslands of the American Midwest, under rolling hills and windswept plains where stories taller than any man once walked. Between 1890 and 1920, a wave of discoveries rippled across archaeological sites in states like Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Thousands of skeletons were unearthed, striking not just for their number, but for their size. 7 feet, 9 feet, some over 12 feet tall. Entire cities of the dead, built for people whose proportions defied explanation. The finds weren't whispered rumors. They made headlines. The New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Washington Post all reported on the so-called giants found buried in elaborate tombs, surrounded by tools, jewelry, and architectural remnants crafted for hands far larger than our own. But almost as swiftly as the discoveries emerged, they vanished. Dr. Alois Hrdlicka of the Smithsonian Institution, one of the era's leading anthropologists, personally oversaw the removal of many of the remains. His reports dismissed the skeletons as pathological anomalies, oversized individuals. Irregular, but explainable. Yet behind the scenes, correspondents painted a different picture, one of institutional discomfort, of deliberate suppression. What was truly unsettling was the consistency. These weren't isolated cases. The remains showed shared features, a distinct subspecies, not afflicted giants, but an evolved lineage of tall, robust humans. Their cities, when excavated, revealed doorways over 8 feet tall, furniture sized to their scale, and tools requiring immense strength to wield. And their technology? Sophisticated metallurgy. Stone blocks moved and placed with engineering skill that rivaled modern methods. Evidence of agriculture, trade, and astronomical alignment in construction. They weren't just large, they were advanced. Then came the silence. Bones disappeared from public view. Museums declined to exhibit them. Academic journals stopped accepting papers on the subject. Independent researchers were defunded, discredited, or ignored. When inquiries were made to the Smithsonian about the thousands of bones reportedly collected in the early 20th century, the answer was always the same. No records, no inventory, no knowledge of such artifacts. But leaked documents told a different story, of collections stored in warehouses, then ordered destroyed under the justification of preservation concerns. An entire chapter of prehistory reduced to ash and absence. Even now, excavations occasionally uncover new skeletal anomalies. But under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, such remains are quickly reburied, often without study, at the request of tribal authorities and federal agencies. The past, once again, placed beyond reach. The giant graveyards challenge more than biology. They threaten a foundational myth, that modern humans are the pinnacle, that history has moved in one direction, from simple to complex, from primitive to sophisticated. These bones suggest otherwise, that other branches of humanity may have reached heights, literal and figurative, we no longer comprehend. So we're left with the echo of enormous footsteps, walking the edges of memory, and a question that has no easy answer. If history is written by the victors, what happens when the victors are smaller, but louder? Perhaps the silence is not just about disbelief. Perhaps it's about scale, not of bone, but of belief. How much are we willing to question, to unlearn, to imagine? And if our ancestors truly stood taller, In every sense, what does it say about the stories we choose to bury, and the truths too large to fit inside our current understanding? It began with stone, not in the grandeur of pyramids or temples, but in scattered fragments across a desert so dry, time forgets to move. In 1961, American archaeologist Charles Berlitz stumbled upon a strange collection of carved stones in the Atacama Desert of Chile. At first glance, they seemed like the remnants of a lost language, symbols, equations, and figures etched into volcanic rock. But the deeper he looked, the stranger they became. These were not ceremonial glyphs or decorative art. They were technical, astonishingly so. Each stone bore precision-carved inscriptions, advanced mathematical formulas, detailed astronomical charts, and chemical diagrams far beyond the supposed capabilities of any known ancient civilization. Some depicted atomic structures with near-modern accuracy. Others mapped the stars, not as they appeared in ancient skies, but as they would be positioned thousands of years in the future. Over 2,000 stones were catalogued. Together, they formed what appeared to be an integrated system, a fragmented library of physics, cosmology, and technology. Periodic tables, relativistic calculations, and even schematics of unknown machines emerged from the dust. Independent physicists who analyzed the carvings were stunned. The equations described quantum phenomena, theoretical principles, and cosmological constants that had only recently entered scientific discourse or were still being debated. The stones didn't merely echo modern science. In some cases, they surpassed it. And then, everything stopped. Berlitz's attempt to transport samples out of Chile was halted. His materials were confiscated at the airport. He was banned from further excavation. Chilean authorities declared the stones national cultural property and sealed off the area. The site became a military zone, monitored, patrolled, and hidden from view. Official reasons cited preservation, but satellite images would later show the landscape transformed, guard towers, fences, and roads carved into the desert, not to study, but to prevent access. What was once a library of stone became a prison of secrets. The most haunting aspect wasn't just the knowledge etched into basalt, but the suggestion of a mind behind it. Whoever carved the stones understood not only the universe, but how to teach it. The inscriptions flowed like lessons, sequential, logical, purposeful. Someone was trying to explain the nature of reality long before we were ready to listen. And now, the stones remain locked away, inaccessible to the world. The equations they bear, untested. The machines they describe, unbuilt. What if they were never meant to be uncovered by accident? What if they were left, intentionally, for a future civilization intelligent enough to read them, humble enough to wonder? The Atacama stones ask a question few dare to speak aloud. What if our science is not discovery, but rediscovery? What if our brilliance is not an ascent, but a return? In every carved line, every etched symbol, lies the possibility that we are not the first to glimpse the structure of the cosmos, that others came before, saw more clearly, and left us a map carved in silence, hoping we would one day understand. And now that we do, or almost do, the question shifts. Will we follow the path they laid, or bury it, as we have so many times before? It began not with ink, but with metal, books that did not age, rust, or burn, hidden deep beneath the skin of the earth. In 1976, Scottish explorer Stan Hall ventured into the remote Taio cave system in Ecuador, following legends of an ancient library hidden underground. What he found was beyond folklore, an immense chamber lined with shelves of metal books, their pages crafted from gold, silver, and other unknown alloys. Thin as parchment, yet flexible and durable, the pages held symbols etched with impossible precision. The books were real. Hall documented over 5,000 volumes, each filled with writing in multiple languages, some identifiable, others unknown to any human culture. But these weren't religious texts or mythic tales. They were technical, scientific. Some contained engineering diagrams, others timelines of human events, past and astonishingly future. One volume, Hall reported, described medical techniques that would not become standard practice for decades. Another contained exact dates and events that hadn't yet occurred, including geopolitical shifts and technological milestones. Some of these predictions have since unfolded with eerie precision. Independent linguists who studied samples confirmed that the unknown scripts followed coherent grammatical structures, suggesting they weren't gibberish or invention, but languages lost to time. And the materials? Analyses suggested alloys not found in nature nor replicated by current metallurgical methods. Pages that flexed like paper yet couldn't be torn, scorched, or eroded. And then, as always, the silence fell. Hall's attempts to bring samples back for further analysis were thwarted. His equipment malfunctioned in inexplicable ways, his photographs distorted beyond use. Then came the intervention. Ecuadorian and British officials seized control of the site. The caves were sealed. Access was restricted. Hall was banned from returning. Official statements claimed the closure was for preservation. Unofficially, the message was clear: forget what you saw. Satellite images later revealed the entrance had been fortified, surveillance equipment installed, entire sections of the cave system walled off with concrete. International requests for scientific collaboration were denied. The books, if they still exist, have not been seen since. Why would such a discovery be hidden? Because it upends every story we tell ourselves about who we are and where we come from. A library that preserves not only history, but possible futures, suggests a civilization that did not merely observe time, but understood it, manipulated it, recorded it with intent. The Taio's library, if real, speaks of minds that grasped more than survival. Minds that studied the fabric of reality and left behind a message, not in words we could forget, but in metal we could not destroy. What civilization created such a thing? How old was it? Why did it fall? And perhaps most unsettling, why did it want us to find its knowledge now? In the quiet of the sealed cave, beneath layers of stone and silence, lie volumes that may hold answers to questions we've only just begun to ask. But those answers remain locked away, not because we aren't ready, but because those in power have decided we shouldn't be. What might we learn if we dared to turn those pages? Or is the greater question this: what have we already forgotten? It began with gears buried in sand, a machine where none should exist, ticking away beneath the silence of centuries. In 1953, deep in the Gobi Desert, a Soviet archaeological team unearthed the fragmented remains of what first appeared to be astronomical instruments, discs, wheels, and bronze fittings scattered among the ruins of an unknown structure. But as the team reassembled the pieces, a staggering realization emerged. They had discovered an observatory, and not just an ancient platform for stargazing, but a mechanical complex designed for calculation. At its center was a device unlike anything recorded in the ancient world, a mechanical computer constructed with interlocking gears and precisely calibrated components. It could predict eclipses, planetary alignments, and celestial events with uncanny accuracy. Some of its functions wouldn't be replicated in the West until the development of modern orreries and analog computing devices more than 1,000 years later. Bronze cogs etched with mathematical ratios, dials that adjusted to account for lunar cycles, mechanical linkages that predicted the movement of Venus and Mars. Not folklore, not approximation, but precision engineering built for continuous use. Dr. Yuri Petrov, the lead archaeologist, documented over 200 instruments and proposed that the site had once served as a research center for ancient scientists. Some of the surviving mechanisms included engraved tables that hinted at logarithmic functions and trigonometric calculations, mathematical knowledge supposedly absent in the region for millennia. Then came the curtain. Before the findings could be published, Soviet authorities classified the entire excavation. Dr. Petrov's work was reassigned. The machinery was transported to undisclosed military research centers. The desert site was cordoned off, paved over, and erased from official records. Satellite images later revealed concrete structures where the observatory once stood, now silent and unnamed. Why suppress such a discovery? Because it reshapes the narrative of science itself. If ancient civilizations had mastered complex mathematics and precision instruments long before Europe's scientific revolutions, then the entire arc of intellectual history must be reconsidered. Progress, it would seem, is not linear, but cyclical. Knowledge may rise and fall like tides. The Gobi Observatory was more than a relic. It was a warning. That brilliance can vanish. That discovery does not always lead to continuity. And that humanity has built, forgotten, and rebuilt its understanding of the cosmos more than once. In whispers, engineers who later examined the machinery described innovations even they could not replicate. Gear tolerances measured in microns, bronze that resisted corrosion over centuries, calibration techniques lost to time. The builders of this ancient observatory were not amateurs guided by superstition. They were scientists, quiet, methodical, deliberate, and they were silenced. The story of the Gobi machines has nearly vanished. Dr. Petrov's name is absent from major publications. The instruments are missing, but the questions they pose endure. What civilization built such devices? And why did it fall? What else did they know, and where did that knowledge go? And if once in the deep silence of the desert the stars were tracked with such clarity and care, what else have we lost to the dust? The stars above us remain the same, but perhaps we have only just begun to remember how to look at them as we once did, not with awe alone, but with understanding. It began in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, not above but below, where a few dared to look. Between 1935 and 1942, French archaeologist Émile Barre led a series of exploratory digs at Giza. While most attention remained fixed on the grandeur above ground, Barre's team uncovered something different, an extensive subterranean complex beneath the pyramid. Tunnels, chambers, and machinery that defied the known history of ancient Egypt. What they found was not mythic treasure or burial rooms, but technology. Components fashioned from unknown alloys, precisely machined parts that showed no wear despite being thousands of years old. Devices resembling hydraulic systems, electromagnetic mechanisms, and rotating components, all integrated into the architecture with chilling intentionality. Barre documented inscriptions on the walls, hieroglyphs that diverged from typical funerary texts. These were technical diagrams, instructions, even maintenance protocols. The glyphs referenced concepts in physics, metallurgy, and energy generation. They described systems built not for ceremony, but for function, for power. Then the discoveries stopped. Egyptian authorities intervened. The excavation permits were revoked. The site was sealed with concrete. Access was restricted under the guise of preservation, and Barre was prohibited from speaking about what he had uncovered. His notes and photographs vanished into private archives or government storage. Independent experts who later reviewed fragments of Barre's documentation found evidence of energy generation methods unknown in ancient history, principles of electromagnetic induction, circuitry embedded into stone, and what appeared to be a long-dormant power system designed to operate without human intervention. British engineer Robert Bauval, decades later, examined copies of the schematics. His conclusion was unnerving. The underground installation showed redundancies, safety controls, and automation, hallmarks of industrial systems, not ceremonial architecture. This wasn't symbolic. It was engineered. but no official institution acknowledged it. No academic journal would publish it, and no modern archaeological mission has been granted permission to re-enter the sealed complex. The story faded, not through refutation, but through silence. Why suppress this? Because it fractures the illusion that human progress is linear. If the builders of the Great Pyramid harnessed principles of energy and mechanics that we only rediscovered in the 19th and 20th centuries, then everything we believe about ancient civilizations must be questioned. These were not primitive laborers stacking stones under divine edict. They were scientists, engineers, designers of systems we are still striving to understand. And perhaps that is the greatest threat, not the knowledge itself, but the humility it demands. That our present may be the echo of a forgotten past. That our brightest discoveries may only be rediscoveries. That we are not the first to reach for the stars or to power the dark. Today, tourists walk beneath the hot Egyptian sun, gazing at ancient stone with reverence. But beneath their feet, a chamber sealed in concrete may still hum softly, unseen. Waiting. What purpose did it serve? What knowledge was left behind? And what does it mean that we chose to bury it? Not because it was false, but because it was too true. In the hush beneath the pyramid, we are reminded, not everything buried is dead. Some truths are merely sleeping deep in the stone, waiting for a time when we are ready to remember. It began in green, an ocean of leaves concealing stories more enduring than stone. In 1967, American archaeologist Dr. Richard Thompson led an expedition into the Amazon, drawn by oral histories that spoke of cities lost to time, of rivers that once ran beside libraries and towers. What he found would defy every assumption held by the academic world. Beneath the canopy, among vine-covered mounds and geometric clearings, were the remnants of advanced civilizations. Cities with engineered drainage, sustainable agriculture, and evidence of large, organized populations. But more than their structures, it was their knowledge that stunned Thompson. He discovered tools of surgical precision, alloys that resisted corrosion, mathematical systems that employed concepts of zero, infinity, and complex geometry centuries before European mathematicians would define them. The Amazon cultures had developed lunar calendars, predictive astronomical models, and civil planning that harmonized with their ecosystem instead of conquering it. Most astonishing were the governance structures. Writings carved into stone tablets and tree bark scrolls revealed legal codes that emphasized equality, representation, and restorative justice. These societies valued education, ecological balance, and human dignity, ideas we often call modern. Yet here they were, already refined in the heart of the forest. But recognition never came. Thompson's papers were denied publication, funding evaporated. Government officials, both local and foreign, invoked national security and cultural protection laws to shut down his research. Some claimed it was to prevent looting or exploitation, but leaked communications told another story, that the evidence could undermine long-standing narratives about indigenous primitivism and European superiority. Institutions feared the consequences of such a shift. If indigenous cultures had achieved social and technological heights equal or superior to their colonizers, then the foundation of centuries of conquest, justification, and control would crack. Worse still, the land those civilizations once occupied was now coveted for oil, timber, and agriculture. Acknowledging their historical sophistication could complicate modern claims. And so, denial became policy. Thompson's findings were buried under bureaucracy, his access revoked, his maps sealed away. Meanwhile, the forest itself began to vanish. Deforestation, mining, and industrial expansion swallowed many of the sites before they could be fully studied. The cities crumbled not from age, but from chainsaws and bulldozers. The past, once etched into the landscape, was erased by the present's appetite. And yet, stories persist. Satellite imagery still reveals geometric patterns, hints of urban planning invisible from the ground. Some locals speak of elders who remember ruins, of artifacts hidden beneath riverbeds and tree roots. The knowledge may not be entirely lost, only driven deeper, like the roots of the forest itself. What would it mean to recognize these societies as equals or predecessors in science, governance, and ecological wisdom? What would it mean to say aloud that the civilizations we erased may have known a better way to live? Perhaps the tragedy is not just what was lost, but what was dismissed, that we did not destroy ignorance but wisdom, that in our rush to dominate we forgot how to belong. In the echoes of the forest, the question remains, what if the primitive world held answers to the problems we still haven't solved? And if those answers remain hidden, is it by accident or design? It began beneath the watchful eyes of lions, carved not in stone, but in time itself. In 1993, while the world's gaze remained fixed on the familiar silhouette of the Sphinx, something unexpected stirred below. Japanese archaeologist Dr. Sakuji Yoshimura had returned, this time not with shovels or brushes, but with instruments that could see through Earth, ground-penetrating radar. And what he saw shook him. Beneath the paws of the great Sphinx, hidden under layers of sand and secrecy, was an object, vast, metallic, and unmistakably artificial, 30 meters long, with internal chambers and intricate geometry. It was not a natural formation, nor a forgotten tomb. It was a machine, an active one. Electromagnetic readings showed energy patterns emanating from the buried structure, mathematical, precise, and entirely, wholly unnatural. The metal, once sampled, revealed isotopes not found on Earth. The architecture echoed engineering principles humanity wouldn't formalize until thousands of years later. It was, by every measure, impossible. Within 48 hours of Yoshimura's announcement, his permits were revoked, his equipment seized. He was escorted from the country. The area was closed off under the pretext of preservation. But preservation of what? The monument or the narrative? The data survived. Transmitted before the shutdown, it confirmed what many already suspected. Something lay beneath the sands of Egypt that did not belong to any known civilization. Whispers of the Sphinx machine began to circulate. Theories multiplied, some wild, others cautious. Was it a power source, a beacon, a remnant of a forgotten era, or a civilization beyond our comprehension? Official channels offered no answers. The excavation site was reinforced with concrete. Academic journals refused to publish Yoshimura's findings. His funding disappeared. Colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to risk their careers for a truth too large to hold. And yet the questions remain. Why does the Sphinx guard not just the past, but perhaps the future? What kind of culture buried technology so far beyond its time? And for what purpose? And why does our world seem so determined not to ask? The story of the Sphinx machine is not an isolated mystery. It is a thread in a tapestry of buried truths, each one challenging the linear story we've told ourselves about human progress. We say we seek knowledge, but when it challenges the scaffolding of belief, do we embrace it or entomb it? Perhaps the machine is not just a relic. Perhaps it is a message that we are not the first to touch the edges of understanding, that others came before us, built wonders, and watched them sink beneath sand and silence. And perhaps it waits, not to be activated, but to be acknowledged. Beneath the unblinking gaze of the Sphinx, something pulses still, quiet, patient, timeless. What if the monument we think of as ancient is merely the tip of a civilization buried deeper than history itself? And what if we are the ones being watched, our curiosity measured, our readiness tested, not by gods, but by the memory of those who came before? It began in firelight, reflected from skulls of quartz, arranged in a circle, humming with something more than silence. Scattered across the jungles of Central America, in the ruins of long-fallen empires, 13 crystal skulls were said to exist. Precision carved from single blocks of quartz, each one identical in scale and form to the human skull, except more perfect, more impossible. Unlike tourist trinkets or ritual masks, these artifacts were sculpted with technology no modern lapidary could replicate. No tool marks, no chipping, no visible entry point for carving. And yet their interiors showed prisms, lenses, and chambers, optical structures that bent and refracted light into cascading patterns. Under the right conditions, they pulsed with energy, projected images, and responded to electromagnetic fields. In 1970, researchers at Hewlett-Packard tested one such skull. Their conclusion: it could not be made with any known tools, past or present. The quartz should have shattered under even the gentlest pressure. And yet here it stood, flawless. Some who witnessed the skulls described them as reactive. They glowed faintly, vibrated under touch, emitted low-frequency sounds when placed in geometric arrangements. One even appeared to project holographic maps of stars, of molecules, of mathematical concepts not discovered until the modern era. But it was never just about the skulls as objects. Legends said they were keys, that when brought together in a precise configuration, the skulls formed a network, activating knowledge, or memory, or something beyond our definitions. Ancient accounts from Maya and Aztec traditions hinted at their guardianship of time itself. Others whispered that they were relics not of Earth, but of elsewhere. Governments and institutions took notice. The skulls were removed from public view. Museums were pressured to hide them or claim they were fakes. Research was suppressed. Testing equipment confiscated. Entire expeditions disappeared from the record. Even those in private collections found their access limited, their work shadowed by sudden interference. Internal documents later revealed why. These weren't just anomalies, they were seen as threats. If authentic, the skulls suggested a civilization that understood energy, matter, and information in ways we still don't. A culture that treated crystal as more than mineral, perhaps as memory, as code, and that, more than anything, challenged the comfort of progress. Because if these skulls held knowledge, if they stored information in vibration, in structure, in light, then history wasn't passed down in scrolls or tablets. It was encoded, waiting in the very shape of matter, in silence, in patience. The true question was never how they were made, but why. Were they warnings, gifts, tools for teaching those not yet ready to learn, or were they mirrors, showing us not what we've lost, but what we've ignored? Today, only a few of the original 13 skulls are known. The rest have vanished into vaults, into myths, into stories told by firelight and wonder. Yet their legend persists because deep down we sense what they represent. That knowledge is not always loud. That wisdom can be hidden in plain sight. And that memory, real memory, can be carved not in words, but in the unbreakable stillness of stone, waiting for the moment when we finally remember how to listen. The crystal skulls remain, silent, unfinished, not relics of a dead past, but echoes of a future we have not yet dared to claim. What if the past was never lost, but locked? We have traveled through deserts, forests, tombs, and caves, not in search of treasure, but of understanding. What began as anomalies, skulls, stones, machines, has revealed something deeper, a pattern not of coincidence, but of erasure. Each of the 13 mysteries we've explored tells a similar story, a moment of revelation followed by disappearance. Discovery followed by silence. Not because the evidence was weak, but because it was strong enough to disturb the story we prefer to believe. History, we are told, moves in one direction, from ignorance to enlightenment. But what if that path is circular? What if civilizations have risen and fallen before, leaving behind traces not of myth, but of mastery? Tools carved in crystal, power grids beneath ancient cities, calculators older than clocks, books written in metal. All speak of knowledge not lost to time, but hidden, deliberately, carefully, perhaps protectively. And behind each act of suppression lies not just fear, but power. The power to shape what we believe, to decide what questions may be asked, and which answers are too dangerous to know. But the artifacts endure. A humming machine beneath the Sphinx, a fossil out of time in South America, a glowing skull in a museum basement. Each one quietly asks, what if the story is bigger? What if we are not the first? What if the future is not ahead, but behind, waiting to be remembered? These are not just archaeological riddles. They are reflections of ourselves, of what we fear, of what we ignore, of what we long to rediscover. We bury truths not only in soil, but in silence. And yet the past does not sleep. It pulses beneath our feet, in patterns of stone and signal. It flickers in symbols, in forgotten languages and impossible machines. It speaks, not in declarations, but in presence, in persistence. Perhaps the real question is not why these discoveries were hidden. Perhaps it is why we keep choosing not to see. In the end, this journey is not about proving what was. It's about imagining what could be. It's about daring to admit that we do not know everything, that the map of human history may be a palimpsest, written and rewritten over eras longer than memory. And if we are willing to listen to the buried frequencies, the fractured timelines, the voices etched into metal and bone, we may yet find not just new answers, but better questions. What have we forgotten? What are we still afraid to learn? And when the time comes to remember, will we be ready? The past is not dead. It is waiting. It always has been.